Suge Knight's career in the music industry began with a mission to seek justice for artists. He began as a bouncer in clubs and eventually became a manager for various musicians, consistently making his presence felt in the industry. After meeting Dr. Dre, Suge learned that artists from NWA, along with other talents at Ruthless Records, owned by Eazy-E and Jerry Heller, were not receiving adequate monetary compensation or sufficient rights, so he decided to take action. In Deathrow Chronicles, Michelet explains how Suge Knight managed to get close to Dr. Dre by consistently being present in his life. Suge would show up wherever Dre was, whether in clubs or the studio. His persistent presence gave the impression of a protector, eventually leading Dre to take him under his wing. This allowed Suge to integrate himself into Dr. Dre's circle and play a significant role in his career. Driven by a savior complex, Suge decided to create his own record label where artists could retain all their rights. However, lacking sufficient funds, he saw Vanilla Ice's success as a potential opportunity. Drawing on his street knowledge from growing up in Compton, surrounded by violence and gang conflicts, Suge resorted to what he knew best: his physical presence. Being a large and imposing figure allowed him to use intimidation to assert dominance, power, and control over others. The initial funds needed to start the label were partially obtained through controversial means, with Suge Knight allegedly using threats to force Vanilla Ice into signing over his royalties to Marion Chocolate Johnson, one of Knight's associates. Shortly after, Michael Harry O'Harris, a drug kingpin serving a life sentence, learned of Knight's plans through his lawyer. Intrigued by the concept of a black-owned label where African-American artists could finally have control over their rights, Harry O chose to invest in launching the label. Although Suge has denied Harry O's involvement in some interviews, Harry O maintained that he was a co-founder and that he contributed to naming the label Deathrow, inspired by his own situation in prison. After securing an investment from Harry O, Suge Knight, Dr. Dre, the DOC, and Dick Griffey, the American record producer and founder of Solar Records, officially founded Deathrow Records in 1991. They launched the label with a celebratory party, marking the beginning of what will become one of the most influential and controversial labels in the music industry. From the start, it was clear how Deathrow would be run. Suge Knight's aggressive approach was evident when he, along with a group armed with bats, forcefully entered the office of Ruthless Records and demanded the contracts of Dr. Dre, Michelet, and the DOC. This early act of violence set the tone for the label's controversial methods and leadership style. As Dr. Dre explained in Deathrow Chronicles, the early days of the label were a golden era for the artist. With access to a fully equipped studio and a highly productive atmosphere, the creative environment was primed for success. On December 15, 1992, The Chronic was released, featuring Snoop Dogg, who was featured on over half of the tracks. The album, combined with Dre's exceptional talent, revolutionized the gangster rap genre. Following The Chronic, Snoop Dogg's debut album, Doggy Style, dropped in November 1993. Snoop's laid-back flow, paired with Dre's now-established signature production, transformed West Coast rap and solidified Deathrow Records as a powerhouse in the music industry. These releases not only brought the influence of hip-hop and gangster rap to the mainstream, but also reshaped the future of the music industry. At the peak of these albums' success, as they dominated the Billboard charts, Deathrow Records was generating significant revenue. It's estimated that the label brought in hundreds of millions of dollars during this period, making Deathrow one of the most profitable and influential labels in the music industry. This immense success made Deathrow seem invincible. The label boasted the hottest artists, the most influential sound, and a reputation for unfiltered authenticity. However, this success also fuels Suge Knight's ego. As Jake Brown discusses in Suge Knight, The Rise, Fall, and Rise of Deathrow Records, mental health professionals have observed that Knight's behavior in running his business aligns with traits of psychopathy, including egocentricity, manipulation, deceitfulness, selfishness, and a lack of empathy, remorse, or guilt. Though this period of invincibility was marked by incredible achievements, beneath the surface, Suge Knight's aggressive and often violent approach was laying the groundwork for future troubles. His management style was notoriously forceful, and he was known for exerting heavy control over the artist, sometimes through physical threats. Instead of avoiding conflict, Knight became increasingly violent and controlling as his success grew, a path that ultimately led to his downfall. The atmosphere at Deathrow Records, as described by many artists, including Snoop Dogg, was akin to a tough love family. Members often brought their gang mentality into the label, creating an environment that resembled a mafia-run operation. In his book, Jake Brown draws a comparison between Suge Knight and Morris Levy, the entrepreneur who co-founded Roulette Records and was a founding partner of the Birdland Jazz Club. Both Knight and Levy used similar tactics to rise to power and manage their labels. Brown describes Levy as a pioneer of mafioso tactics in the record business, noting how he withheld royalties from artists. Suge, on the other hand, established Deathrow with the promise of giving artists what they deserved for their music. However, many artists reported that instead of receiving money, they were given material items like cars and houses. The parallels between Knight and Levy also extend to their backgrounds. Levy was linked to the Genovese crime family, while Knight grew up around the Bloods gang in Compton. As a result, Deathrow was run like a street operation. The label welcomed people from Compton's inner city neighborhoods and operated without middlemen. Suge Knight believed that using intermediaries would contradict his goal of avoiding the very issues he had set out to escape. On August 3, 1995, the legendary Source Awards took place in New York City, where Deathrow Records won an award for their soundtrack to the film Above the Rim. With Tupac in jail at the time, Suge Knight accepted the award on behalf of the label. During his acceptance speech, Suge took a shot at Puff Daddy and Bad Boy Records, viewing them as a significant threat. With both labels dominating their respective coasts, Suge was determined to ensure Deathrow came out on top. In hindsight, this rivalry, which seemed almost childish, played a key role in deepening the division between East and West Coast hip-hop. Despite Tupac not yet officially signed with Deathrow Records, Suge Knight was demonstrating his support for Tupac and positioning himself as someone who genuinely cared for him. This support was crucial, as Tupac was embroiled in a strained relationship with his former friend Biggie. After being shot in New York in 1994, Tupac believed it was a setup orchestrated by Biggie and Puff Daddy, leading to a deep-seated grudge against them. Aware of Tupac's feelings, Suge seized the moment to criticize the East Coast label, particularly Puff Daddy, who held a similar role to Suge at Bad Boy Records.
Tell Tupac to keep his guards up, we ride with him. Any artists out there want to be an artist and want to stay a star, and don't want to have to worry about the executive producer trying to be all in the video, all on the record, dancing. Come to Deathrow.
Following this event, Suge visited Tupac and proposed a deal. He would post a $1.4 million bail needed for Tupac's release in exchange for a 3-album deal. Tupac accepted the offer, marking the beginning of a new chapter in Deathrow's history. After Tupac signed with Deathrow Records, he quickly dove into creating new music, starting with the hit single California Love, featuring Dr. Dre. This track later appeared on his first Deathrow album, All Eyez on Me. By joining Deathrow, Tupac became part of a larger family and found a father figure in Suge Knight, who eagerly stepped into this role, given Tupac's upbringing without a father. Suge became not only Tupac's mentor, but also a close friend. During the first half of 1996, the label reached its peak. The release of All Eyez on Me in February 1996 catapulted both the label and Suge Knight to new heights. The album debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200 and eventually became one of the best-selling rap albums of all time. The monumental success of All Eyez on Me solidified Deathrow Records' reputation as the label with the most powerful artists in the industry. During this time, the label also nurtured artists like Nate Dogg and the Dogg Pound, which included Daz Dillinger and Corrupt, making significant contributions to Deathrow. Influential women in hip-hop, such as Lady of Rage and Michelet, also played important roles. Among all the label's successes, Tupac's achievements stood out as Suge Knight's biggest triumph. Signing Tupac and further elevating his career demonstrated Suge's ability to not only attract top talent, but also to enhance it. The dynamic between Tupac and Suge was ideal. Tupac needed the support and resources that Suge could provide, while Suge needed Tupac's star power to keep the label at the forefront of the industry. During this period, the iconic photo of Suge Knight, Tupac Shakur, Snoop Dogg, and Dr. Dre posing like the Goodfellas was taken. This photo not only highlights the 4 key figures of the label, but also reflects how Deathrow was run. Kevin Powell from Vibe magazine, who took the photo, described his visit to the Deathrow office. Right in front of Suge's big wooden desk, outlined in white on the red carpet, is the Deathrow Records logo. A man strapped to an electric chair with a sack over his head. I was told by another journalist that no one steps on the logo. No one. This detail underscores Suge's serious and intimidating approach to running the label, contributing to his reputation as one of the most dangerous figures in hip-hop. Tupac's entry into Suge Knight's collective marked a significant shift in his approach to music and his public persona. Surrounded by top West Coast rappers and given the freedom to express himself creatively, Tupac's demeanor became more aggressive and confrontational. According to Snoop Dogg, who stated in a 2023 interview with Big Boy TV, Tupac adopted a military-like attitude, assertive about what needed to be done and unafraid to tell others how they should behave.
Man, Pop was a military-minded motherfucker. So he always had a plan, but his train of thought was military. It became one point that me and him had to meet like on some real military shit where it was like, this the new rule. This him telling me, I talk to you, you talk to me. Your soldiers don't talk to me, and my soldiers don't talk to you. You understood? All right, I got it.
This rebellious leader mentality was deeply rooted in him from a young age, partly influenced by his mother, Afeni Shakur, who was involved with the Black Panthers. Under Suge Knight's influence, Tupac fully embraced this assertive approach. His relationship with Suge was notably closer than Suge's relationship with other label artists like Dr. Dre or Snoop Dogg. Dre in particular had concerns about the gang-related elements of Deathrow's management. While he appreciated the success of collaborating on new tracks with Tupac and benefiting from the label's rise, Dre remained cautious about the gang affiliations and how they were being managed. During this period, Tupac was on a rapid release schedule, putting out albums and intensifying his feud with East Coast rappers. He targeted Biggie Smalls, the Junior Mafia crew, and other prominent East Coast artists in his diss tracks. The East Coast-West Coast rivalry escalated, becoming increasingly volatile and dangerous. Tupac held a grudge against Biggie, Diddy, and Bad Boy Records, believing they were responsible for his 1994 shooting in New York City. Suge Knight fully supported this belief, further fueling Tupac's animosity towards the East Coast. Suge's protective nature played a significant role in enabling Tupac's raid. With Suge's backing and the protection of a loyal crew, Tupac felt emboldened to express his anger more freely. This dynamic created a riskier situation, as Tupac's rage was not only validated but also shielded by a powerful figure and his entourage. Suge Knight and Deathrow Records played a crucial role in unleashing Tupac's creativity. During his time with the label, Tupac recorded approximately 150 tracks and released 3 albums in less than a year. However, the environment also seemed to amplify the darker aspects of his personality. As Snoop Dogg noted, it was evident to everyone that Tupac's time might be cut short. Allegedly, Tupac even told a girlfriend that signing with Deathrow Records was like selling his soul to the devil, reflecting the deep conflict he felt between the label's influence and his own life. During this period, Deathrow increasingly became gang-led, as depicted in the movie Straight Outta Compton. While Dr. Dre focused on recording with various artists, the studio environment was anything but professional. In the adjacent rooms, gang parties were taking place, creating an environment that mirrored the streets of Compton rather than a polished recording studio. This transformed the successful label's studios into a reflection of the environment many of its members had originally tried to escape. Following these incidents, Dre decided to leave Deathrow Records. Disillusioned by the label's shift towards a mafia-led operation, he chose to pursue his own label with a sole focus on music. Dre's departure marked the beginning of Deathrow's decline, as the label lost one of its key artists. Despite still having other talented musicians and continuing to release new tracks, Deathrow's fate soon took a turn for the worse, signaling the start of its eventual downfall. In September 1996, on the night just before Tupac Shakur was fatally shot on the streets of Las Vegas, Tupac and Suge became involved in a confrontation with Compton Crips gang member Orlando Anderson. Despite being on parole, Suge chose to intervene, driven by a sense of immediate gratification and a disregard for long-term consequences, a trait psychologists describe as now-oriented thinking. According to Jake Brown's book, this impulsive mindset reflects psychopathic characteristics, where short-term desires overshadow rational consideration of future repercussions, further intensifying the danger surrounding them. The strong bond between Tupac and Suge was evident in their us-against-the-world mentality. Their relationship mirrored a mob dynamic, with Suge in the role of boss and Tupac as the capo, providing mutual protection. This dynamic is captured in Tupac's last photo, where he gazes intensely at the camera, while Knight, seated in the driver's seat, appears as a protector or savior. Following Tupac's fatal shooting, Suge Knight, the primary witness, refused to identify the shooter. Adhering to the gang or mafia mentality, he remained resolute in his refusal to cooperate with law enforcement, sticking to a code of silence. Raised with a strong aversion to snitching, Knight upheld this principle throughout his life. In an interview with Primetime Live, when asked if he had any information about Tupac's assassination and whether he would share it with the police, Knight responded,
Absolutely not. It's not my job. I don't get paid to solve homicides. I don't get paid to tell on people.
Suge Knight's refusal to cooperate with law enforcement fueled speculation about his involvement in Tupac's murder. Rumors circulated that Tupac was planning to leave Deathrow Records, which some believed could have motivated Knight to act against him. Although Knight repeatedly claimed in interviews that Tupac had no intention of leaving the label and was content with his position, his history and behavior surrounding Deathrow made it difficult for many to fully believe his denial of involvement. Shortly after Tupac's death, Suge Knight began serving a 9-year prison sentence. The instability at Deathrow Records became increasingly apparent. With both Tupac and Dr. Dre gone, Snoop Dogg and other prominent artists decided to leave the label. Feeling out of place and recognizing the label's decline, Snoop Dogg highlighted the negative energy surrounding Deathrow. Snoop's departure underscored the inevitable downfall of Deathrow. Despite its earlier success and prominence, the label's decline was marked by significant losses and troubles, leading to a hard and tragic end. Meanwhile, from prison, Suge Knight remained hopeful about reviving Deathrow Records. In interviews from jail, he described prison as the worst place to be, but acknowledged that it provided him time to reflect on many things that he hadn't considered before. Despite this period of self-reflection, his attempts to save the label continued to be marred by threats and violent efforts to regain control over his artists. In an interview with Big Boy TV, Snoop Dogg revealed that he never felt unsafe while signed to Deathrow Records. However, he did feel threatened after leaving the label. This highlighted a disconnect between Suge Knight's attempt at personal growth and his ongoing aggressive methods at managing the label and its artists. With the departures of Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre, the death of Tupac, and Suge Knight's imprisonment, Deathrow Records was left without its central figures. The label's decline became inevitable, and it was clear that nothing could restore it to its former glory. The absence of Dr. Dre's creative influence, combined with the loss of Snoop's and Tupac's enthusiasm, left Deathrow unable to sustain its success. During Suge Knight's imprisonment, Deathrow primarily relied on releasing music from its vaults, including unreleased tracks by Tupac, to maintain its presence and capitalize on its past success. In 1999, Knight attempted a comeback with the compilation album Suge Knight Represents Chronic 2000, featuring performances by various artists including Tupac, Corrupt, DJ Quick, and The Outlaws. Although the album performed reasonably well on the Billboard charts, it was poorly received by both fans and critics. The album highlighted the decline of Deathrow Records and marked a pivotal moment for Suge Knight as a record label owner. The album's lackluster reception reflected the fans' disillusionment, compounded by the loss of the label's 3 most prominent artists and the negative associations surrounding Knight. Suge was widely blamed not only for Tupac's death, but also for the later murder of the notorious B.I.G., further tarnishing Deathrow's reputation. After Suge Knight's release from prison in 2001, and amidst ongoing disputes with Snoop Dogg, Deathrow attempted to stay afloat by bringing Corrupt back and signing new artists like British R&B singer Mark Morrison and Left Eye from TLC. Despite these efforts, the label struggled to regain its former prominence. On April 4, 2006, both Suge Knight and Deathrow Records filed for bankruptcy, marking the inevitable collapse of the label. The fate of Deathrow Records worsened after its bankruptcy. In 2009, the label was sold at auction for $18 million to Wide Awake Entertainment Group. Wide Awake released a substantial amount of previously unreleased material, but eventually filed for bankruptcy itself in 2012. In February 2022, Snoop Dogg announced that he would acquire the rights to Deathrow Records. A few days later, on February 11, 2022, he released his 3rd album through the label, BODR, Back on Death Row. This marked a full-circle moment, with the label once again under the ownership of one of its most prominent artists from its heyday. Despite currently serving a 28-year sentence for a hit-and-run incident in 2015, Suge Knight continues to appear in interviews and podcasts, highlighting the lasting impact he has made on the world of hip-hop. His continued presence in the media underscores his significant role and influence in the rap industry.